You could use the map first with the presentation.
Presentation first, and if the map, you need to pull it up, you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody else? Oh, I do.
You somehow got them to pay.
Sorry, anybody else? Yeah, I have 3 people. I'll let it in. You know who they are? Members. Ken, Kaya, and Galaxy X. I need you to.
Need some.
Have them to.
Oh, yeah, because there's a lag. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the way it is.
Who's that?
Too.
yeah.
Doing something and then. a little
Please turn
while.
the microphones on.
Oh, no, that's
Huh?
our stalker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we know who that is. Oh. Oh, now she's gone. Wait a minute. Yeah, I just left. I don't know. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. I think, Dan, you're gonna start us off.
Okay. Um, a little quick thing I'd like to talk about before we get to the first agenda item. That's so loud. With the rise in construction costs, the rise in interest rates right now, we're seeing a lot of projects that are getting delayed. And I know that during the pandemic, I think Bandon did, and I know jurisdictions all over the state went ahead and granted people extensions of their period of time where they need to pull building permits. I just kind of wanted to look around the room and see if folks would objectively bring something like that to city council at a council meeting soon. I just didn't want to spring it on you without at least mentioning
I
it.
have no objection because I know how hard it is to get building materials right now.
Yeah, I didn't think there'd
Doors and
be.
windows especially.
Anything we can do to expedite.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. We'll figure out the best vehicle, whether it's an ordinance, resolution, whatever it is. I know Dana was looking into that for us. So homeless camping ordinance. Here we go. All right. And can you get that into the slideshow view so the other slides aren't? There we go. So we weren't reading ahead. So we've talked about this generally. I've written about it in newsletters on Facebook quite a bit, but I know there was a lot of interest in the council. I'm wondering when we were going to get this going. I think it's been really good to wait because we have been able to learn from a whole lot of learning that other jurisdictions have gone through, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There's been a lot of talk of this July 1st deadline in the state statute. The deadline really is, it's a non-deadline, really, because it's a deadline beyond which you can't cite somebody for camping in the wrong place unless you have a reasonably objective ordinance. I don't think we've cited people We've tended to do other things and it's been fairly successful at getting folks to move along, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, we do plan to get this done by July 1st, but first, we have a pretty good draft ordinance in place. We want to talk about some of the policy options we have to go through before we step forward and do this. Next slide, please. So what's happening in Bandon? When we all live here, we all see a few homeless people around town, I think, from time to time. We generally don't, I think, see them on public property. That could obviously change. And one of the reasons is there's no shelter here. There are no resources here. Those are the things that tend to keep the homeless population down in those communities where the population is down. Folks tend to congregate where they have services. People who become homeless or houseless tend to stay in the community where they were before they became houseless. And I don't know how that affects Bandon or whether it's different between being on the coast or not being on the coast, but I think we're fairly fortunate that this really hasn't been a big problem. In the past, we have offered transportation to people to places with services. That was generally Coos Bay. That's been a police department thing for a long time. We've offered vouchers, we've offered people rides. And I want to note there's a lot more homeless people than we see on the streets. Many children. I couldn't find the statistic, but there's a tragic number of homeless children even in our school district. These are kids that are couch surfing, moving between friends' places, likely sleeping in vehicles in some places that we don't know about. Go ahead, next slide, please. I'm going to first talk about this sort of legal background, right? What's behind this and what can we do, right? Our goals are, it's not a huge problem in Bandon. We don't want it to become one, right? Anybody that's been to Eugene or Portland or other places has seen what happens when camps get established. They block sidewalks. They're full of things that have been stolen from other people. It's just, anyway, anyone that's been up there knows what I'm talking about. We don't want that to happen here in Bandon. Next slide, please. So we provided you with a guide from the League of Oregon Cities that talks about a whole bunch of the legal issues. I'm going to go over a couple of them pretty quick. They boil down, I think, to a pretty easy set of principles to apply at the end. Next slide, please. Basically, this is all underpinned by the Eighth Amendment. And what the Eighth Amendment has said in the case law applied to homeless people is, you can't punish someone for just being what they are. You can't have a status offense, right? They used to have ordinances and codes that said it's illegal to be a drunk, right? Well, you can't punish somebody's status. You can punish their behavior potentially, but you can't punish something that they can't control. Next slide. The first case, Ninth Circuit case, Martin v. Boise. Kind of the seminal case in this part of the country on what's happened with homeless camping. What's come out of that really is, you can't criminally punish being homeless. Cities aren't required to build shelter. You can have reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, but whatever you do has to be in city limits. In other words, your alternative can't be, well, there's a shelter in Coos Bay, right? So you can't be here. But again, the court said you can't punish somebody for something that they can't control. In Martin v. Boise, the court looked into things like, well, are there shelters actually available? Some of the shelters you had to participate in prayer to be able to take advantage of that shelter. They said that wasn't a reasonable alternative. Next case. Next slide, please. Blake v. City of Grants Pass says most of the same things. It added, you can't punish people for trying to stay warm and having this sort of basic rudimentary protection from the elements, right? Can't punish somebody for trying to stay warm when it's raining or snowing. The access to shelter has to be true. It has to be actual access. It can't be hypothetical access. If the shelters are full and you can't get into them, they're going to do a factual inquiry into whether or not you folks actually had access. Did talk about car camping a little bit. Talk about that in a minute. But again, the court said, whatever your options are for people, they have to be in city limits. Right? And the reason the option comes up is you say, okay, you can't be here. Where can they be? Where can I be? There's got to be some realistic option. Next slide. And the court ruling, I've said this a couple of times, but you can't punish an involuntary act or condition if it's an unavoidable consequence of your status or being. So if you don't have a house, we can't punish, we can't punish that. I mean, I know somebody in Coos Bay, a young woman had a job, not living in a tiny home in somebody else's place, but driving delivery, an uninsured, driver drunk crosses the road, head-ons her, fractures her sternum, 6 months, she can't lift more than 4 pounds. So that's, many people that become homeless are that, that kind of, they're addicts. About a third, they think, of the homeless population are, have substance abuse disorder or some form of addiction. Those are generally the folks that are committing crimes. But there's a lot of people who just ended up there, particularly in places where the housing markets have gone crazy, like here, or Portland, or Seattle, or San Francisco. What we don't know after these 2 cases, though, is, they say things and they say, well, you can't punish X, but what can you punish? So if being homeless or sleeping outside is an unavoidable consequence, what other involuntary acts or conditions are unavoidable consequences of your status or being? The one that seems pretty obvious to me is, where are people going to the bathroom? I won't say much more than that, but we can all, use our imaginations if we wish to go there. What kinds of specific time, place, and manner restrictions can cities impose about where, when, and how a person can sleep, lie, or sit on public property? Again, the courts always say, well, you can impose these time, place, and manner regulations, but there's not much more guidance than that. And what specific provisions can you impose that will bar a person who's experiencing homelessness from obstructing the right of way? So where can you tell people they can't camp? Next slide. So there's 2 bills that came out of the Oregon legislature last year and the year before. They kind of restate Martin and Blake. The next slide. So this is what the law now says. If you're regulating the act of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry, which is a new thing, on public property outside, your ordinance has to be objectively reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances as applied to all stakeholders, including persons experiencing homelessness. So that all stakeholders seems to broaden the inquiry a little bit, right? Because we're all stakeholders, property owners are stakeholders. In Portland got sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act because no one could use the sidewalks because the sidewalks were being blocked. So maybe that's a little more permissive statement of the law or not. We really don't know until it gets further applied. But it does say you've got to have, something's got to be objectively reasonable. I don't know exactly what that means, but it says you've got to have an ordinance, and some judge will at some point decide whether you were reasonable or not. Next slide. I'm going to divert a little bit. House Bill 3124 talks about campsites and what you have to do with established campsites. You've got to give 72 hours of written notice. You've got to post it at all of the entrances. There are exemptions or exceptions if there's illegal activity going on, stolen property, drug use, fires, those kinds of things. Next slide, and then the slide after that. One more. If we take personal property from breaking down a campsite, we have to store it. For 30 days, we can discard things that have no value, obviously. Things that are unsanitary, weapons, drugs, and stolen property can be seized by the police. But anything with any value or utility has to be retained for 30 days. And you've got to store it in the community where the campsite was. So as onerous as that is, I think one of our goals and the goals of many small cities is to prevent campsites from happening. Because once they're established, it's a big process to get them taken down. And it's horrendously expensive. Because the folks that are doing it have got to be able to protect themselves from needles. Human feces, all those kinds of things that might be in a campsite. So it's a really, really expensive proposition to move or remove these campsites. So next slide. Wow, there we go. Some fancy animation I didn't know I put in there. Framework for local ordinances, right? So we kind of now know what the law, what it says and what it doesn't tell us. That kind of sets up this framework. So go ahead, next slide, please. All right, it's got to be objectively reasonable. I'm not really sure what objectively reasonable means because the two words don't seem to go together to me. But what it means, according to the courts, is you look at all the circumstances, it may not be necessarily the specific circumstance of the single homeless person that you're dealing with, but just stepping back and looking at how a reasonable community would deal with the situation. Got to comply with the federal and state laws we've already discussed. Must be in place by July 1, 2023. And this last bullet says be cognizant of the state created danger principle. And if you read that LOC guidance, it talked about that a little bit more. One of the biggest problems with creating a designated camping area is that you may then assume liability for all of the bad things that might happen there. Again, I think it's a really fuzzy place to be, because obviously when you start drawing lines around places where people can't go, if you draw enough lines, you end up with the one place that they can go, and you may end up in that same boat. I know there was a bill in this legislative session to try to shield local governments from that. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened with that bill. Figured. Yeah. Yeah, and it may actually, I'm seeing some other legislation that may be going the other way. Next slide. So what's left? Right, so we can enforce laws that actually further public health and safety, right? Littering, public urination or defecation, obstruction of roadways, illicit substances, harassment, violence. So we do have a toolbox to deal with the impacts of or the actions of people experiencing homelessness. We've got to remember that, and I think the community has to remember that, and we do enforce those laws now. Where that may butt up against is at some point your status, is any of that unavoidable, right? So there's a line somewhere in between there, and I don't think we've gotten much guidance about where that line is. But we can do time, place, and manner. So next slide, please. So to the extent that camping does happen, we're going to try to develop these objectively reasonable time, place, and manner regulations, right? We can ensure that those folks are safe and secure, as they can be in their situation, but managing our public spaces in a way that ensures those resources are available for use by all residents. And I would add to that our residents and visitors, right? Because we're a very visitor dependent community. Next slide. Time. So, you know, we well know some communities have designated camping spots. I'll talk a little bit about what's happened with some of those. Some folks that have tried them have had to retry them or do them over. Seaside tried, Newport tried. We all know Eugene and Portland have places. If there's a camp that's considered established, you may still have to do this 72 hours notice and storage of personal property. It's important, I think, for everybody to remember that we may not in the future have the kind of law enforcement resources necessary to respond to each person at each point in time, right? I think right now that's possible, and we hope that it stays that way, but I think the community's got to recognize that we may not be able to just pull people off of whatever else they're doing to go deal with a single homeless person somewhere on public property. Places that have these regulations sometimes allow some discretion for people who work at night. If there's really severe weather, or people with children that are minors. So for example, if you say folks who got to move by 7 in the morning and get off the sidewalk and move at least 500 feet to another location so the camp doesn't get established. Well, what if somebody works at night? They've actually got a job, but they're still homeless. So you may want to allow some kind of discretion in your ordinance for those kinds of situations. And the point is, it really requires some prioritization and some discretion, I think, between either your staff or the police that administer this. Next slide. There's a number of different approaches here about how people do it. Some cities say you can't camp on public property, but you can camp on rights of way or some rights of way. So no public property would be city hall, city parks, utility facilities, water, sewer, but you can camp on rights of way, some rights of way. Others have said, no, you can't camp on any of these particular zones. There's a number of ways to draw these kind of restrictions about where people can't be. And we've got a couple of outlines of what we think might be a proposal and some options for you guys to consider.
Keep them out of specific like residential. I mean, we wouldn't want them.
Yeah.
at everybody's house.
Right. A couple of cities say that you can't be adjacent to any residence. Some places say you can't be in residential zones. For us, it may be because we've got actually quite a bit of housing in commercial zones, we may decide to do that. You can't be next to a residence thing. I would know there are people out there looking for test cases, right?
Yes.
Grants Pass was folks looking for a test case. You had some organized individuals who thought they weren't being treated in accordance with the Constitution. They sought legal help, they got it, and they won. And they won both at the circuit, at the trial court and at the Court of Appeals. Next slide. So I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit between sort of the vehicle camping and private property and public property. But one of the bills has said that we have to allow the siting of emergency shelters in spite of what our zoning code says. So some places allow churches, for example, to host vehicle camping or safe sleeping. Now, those ordinances always say you've got to have sanitation, garbage, and other services available. So the burden of doing that is on the host. The town of Jefferson, thanks to June for getting us a copy of their ordinance, would allow only 2 in any one church or location. Bend allows up to 6. I know from personal experience, having done this with some churches in Clackamas County, it's horribly controversial when people see the specter of that thing coming to their neighborhood. Once it's there, depending on the situation, people tend to be more accepting of it. And it depends, I think, in some cases, whether or not what the option is, right? If there are people sleeping in the streets on cars all over the place, you may decide that it's better to put them all in the church parking lot if the church is willing to host them. But again, host them means that they're actually taking care of the sanitation, garbage, and those other side issues. So that's a question I think worth discussing a little bit, and I can just go through the next few slides and we can kind of open it up for that discussion if you'd like. Vehicle camping. So in West Coast cities, they're estimating probably 1/3 of the unhoused people are sleeping in their cars. Newport tried that. It didn't work because there was not enough structure around the parking situation to contain sort of the external effects. So, I mean, the lesson from Newport is you really do need structure. That happened also in Seaside as well. But in Seaside, which designated a camping area, but had a limited time, what they found is there were a lot of elderly people living in their RVs who didn't have anywhere else to go. So I know both Seaside and Newport are taking a whole nother look at what they've tried to do. And I think that's a lesson we should keep in mind going in, that whatever we do, we will likely tweak it if things happen that don't work for us. If we have specific exclusions of people, in other words, if somebody's going to be, we think you person are so disruptive or violent or whatever, we're going to exclude you from this place where we let other people be. We've got to have some kind of due process hearing right or something for anybody that we do that with. Next slide, please. And we're going to get to the proposed approach here in just a couple of slides. I talked about this a little bit. So, you can allow right of way only. That's Bend. So in Bend, you can't be in a city park. You can't be at City Hall. You can't be at the water plant, the sewer plant, police station. You can only be in right of way. I think in Bend, that ended up being some kind of undeveloped right of way where people tended to sort of congregate because they figured out that was the spot. can allow on some city property with exceptions. So it could be, you could say city property, but not city park, city hall, water plant or sewer plant, which would leave other city property that, you know, we might allow people to camp.
Like Long Fillmore or something like that.
I'm afraid that any specific place I mention is gonna get me pilloried somewhere in town, but you know, we've got the city owns property, right? We've got the Woolen Mill property, we've got the dump yard down near Rose Road, we've got, you know, lots around places that could be in or out if you allowed some city property and not rights away, and that's a trade-off, right? Because is it more problematic to have people in your rights of way overnight or in the morning when people are coming to work versus having those people camped out at the Woolen Mill property? I'm not proposing anything or anywhere. I'm just giving you the geographic reality of Bandon. And, you know, designated camping areas Seaside has had and Newport tried as well. Next slide, please. So there's areas of concern though, right? I mean, almost everybody says you can't be too close to a school, a childcare facility. Some places say we don't want houseless folks in our parks. Some places say you can't be adjacent to a residence. For Bandon, I would add tourist facilities. That may not be the look that we want to present to folk who come here. Lastly, manor. And I think manor is really you know, those are all the other things that happen around houselessness that you can regulate. You know, garbage, other illegal activities. Illegal activities are still illegal activities, and they're going to be enforced as such. Fires are a big issue. Stoves are a big issue. I mean, folks will do, I mean, if you're trying to keep yourself warm, it's hard to fault people if they're already in that situation from trying whatever they can to keep warm. But some of those things can be really unsafe. It can be unsafe for them and unsafe for the neighborhood. So there's lines getting drawn differently all over the place about what you can do to stay warm. Next slide. So here's what we're thinking. It's just kind of a starting list of some restrictions, and I'd like to hear from you all what you think. No camping in residential districts. Or you could just say, you could be broader and say no camping adjacent to a residence. But all of that depends exactly on where you are, right? If you sort of in my neighborhood, for example, you could be in the district but not adjacent to a residence, but you could be out, you did up on a right of way and you'd still be in the neighborhood if you were camping. So it's tough because if you layer too many of these things together, obviously you're going to end up with the one spot, right? Parks within 500 feet of a school. We're thinking about the marine commercial area as a tourist area. That'd be the waterfront. Manor, in order to prevent camps from being established and therefore having to go through notice and store stuff, some jurisdictions would say you got to move every day, at least 500 feet. That's part of our proposed approach, because otherwise I think a camp is established. If it's been there for a day or two. No structures. Right, no permanent structures, and we would define in the ordinance a little bit more what a structure is. But again, the more of a structure there is, the more it looks like it's an established camp, the harder it is to move and the more disruptive it is. So no storing of stuff beyond whatever personal items you need, which based on experience in other places means you're not storing stuff that was stolen. There's places in Portland that look like bike shops. I mean, the bikes are all taken apart. I know several of my bicycles when I was up there, I'm sure are there. Remember, it's got to be objectively reasonable, right? So again, we don't know what that means, but it probably means at some point somebody will say you're too strict.
Dan, is there something in the law that says it's only 500 feet? I mean, could we make it 1,000 feet that they have to move? Or do you have to be 500 feet or under?
That's not a thing that comes from anywhere else except us.
Oh, okay.
It's just a way, it's a way to prevent a camp from being established, right? So how far you've got to move. I don't know what
I just think 500 feet within the position of a school is way too close.
No, you can't be within 500 feet of a school no matter what. That's
Right.
well, that's what we're proposing.
But then Okay. All right,
But if you had a camp somewhere else on another right of way or another place, you'd have to get up, you'd have to move it every day.
500 feet's nothing.
No matter what we do, who's gonna enforce?
Yeah, that's true.
That's the, it's the
Like all other
police.
ordinances.
It's the police. It's like every other ordinance. It's the police. I don't think that would be a code enforcement officer kind of thing.
Richard's going, no, it's not.
Well, again, I think the goal is, I think, to prevent camps from happening.
Yeah, not have
So-
to remove them once they're there.
My thought would be that people will not hesitate to complain if a camp starts to be established in their neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So like anything else, I think enforcement is a question of resources and priorities, right, for the police. And that's why we said earlier, it's not really going to be reasonable for us to expect that every time somebody says, oh, this person's been here, that you're supposed to move at 7 and it's 9:30 and they haven't moved yet. Well, we may be pursuing more important things at that time. But at least I'm not necessarily defending any of this. There's a whole host of ways to go. But we got to do something. It's got to be reasonable, and we've got to have in order to do that, we've got to have some kind of a toolbox. But I think today, right, as we look around town, we've emailed about this a little bit. I think most of the homeless folk, when you see them, are on private property.
Yeah, I
Right.
noticed that.
Because if they're panhandling, they're panhandling where a lot of people are.
And they're
Um,
not trying to be out in your face. I mean, they're like the guy in the shopping center said, they're coming in very early in the morning and trying to wash up and things, and then they're gone. They disappear back into wherever they are. They're not trying to,
Yeah.
upset people.
Yeah, Chief Dillon says you got people just really, they're tunneling into the brush.
Yeah.
what?
They're tunneling into the brush,
Yeah.
during the day and trying to be as unobtrusive as
Yeah.
they can be. So I think the idea here is to have tools in the toolbox in the event that we need them
Exactly.
without and
Yeah.
being able to very clearly draw the line to say you can't, if it looks like camps getting established in Bandon, we'll enforce this and we'll stop it. Or if there's a secondary problem like fires, like structures, like some of those kinds of things. Next slide, please. But whatever we do, we're going to tweak it, right? I mean, we know that Newport, like I said, they had a safe parking area. They shut it down.
How long did it take them to shut it down?
No, it was up for a while.
Was it?
Seaside's had one, I think, for a year.
Really?
Wow.
And, like I know they ended up allowing longer camping times at some places. They said you can be here, but it can only be so many days. Well, they found out that they had, again, elderly people living in an RV, sometimes with medical issues who had to be close to a place. But again, we're not the Coos Bay North Bend right now. We don't have RVs all over the streets. We should count our blessings that we are
Right.
where we are. Next slide. So that was a lot of words from me. Love to hear your questions, thoughts. We'll be pulling together an ordinance sort of based on this kind of starting list of things. There's a lot more details, obviously, I didn't get into, but if you guys have general thoughts about, for example, should we be not near a residence or not in a residential neighborhood?
Dan, in order for us to comply with the law for July 1, we have to vote on this at our next city council meeting in June, right?
Yeah, but
Or call a special meeting in June?
we could, yeah,
Okay,
we can call a special meeting if it takes more than a night or a hearing to get through it. One of the reasons we wanted to have a work session and talk about it, make sure that we weren't, there wasn't a very specific direction that the council would like us to go, that we're
I
not,
think we were trying to ignore it.
going. But again, if July 1st comes and goes and we don't have an ordinance, I think we're going to be just about where we are today.
Right. We're not going to cite people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not citing people now. We are citing for all for any secondary offenses. So if it happens in, first meeting in July, it's probably not the end of the world, but we just as soon get it done in June if we can.
Sure.
My kids live in Bedford and they're noticing a huge increase. In fact, there's a lot of signs that indicate other communities are busing their people into Bedford.
Do they have a large medical facility there?
You know, two of them.
Yeah, there you
In
go.
any case, Medford's just now starting their heat wave. It's gonna be over 90 every day there, probably from here on out. And as it gets warmer, we're gonna start seeing the homeless migrate to the coast where it's cooler, at least temporarily.
Yeah.
So I do think we need to have something in place because, you know, it's gonna start getting hot over there, and that's why they come over here to recreate, get out of the heat.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna have to have something in place if we definitely see an uptick.
Just like yesterday at the beach.
No,
And we can carry a couple of these options forward to, you know, first reading of an ordinance and amend on the fly if we need to, but I think. I don't hear anything from any objections to folks have got to move. We don't want camps established. You can't build shelter, you can't build structures.
Right.
Clearly, I think, you know, areas like City Park, the waterfront. You know, there's the residential neighborhoods versus adjacent to a residence. You know, maybe adjacent to a residence is maybe a better way to go. Because that will capture most of your residential neighborhoods and houses in commercial areas.
You can also limit the number of people you allow to congregate in one spot, I believe.
Mhm.
You can reduce the amount of people, you know, that has its pros and cons, I suppose, but that is an option.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I know there's a lady on Riverside that lives on Riverside Drive, and there were some homeless people. She owns water west of Riverside Drive to the water. And she noticed there was a homeless camp way back in there. I don't know how they didn't get swamped when the high tide comes in, but she cleared all that property recently. She just sent a crew in there and cleared it all because she didn't want them in there. But if homeless people go onto private property that's vacant and forested, and it's discovered there's a little camping thing going on, how difficult is it to get them out of there?
It's up to the property owner.
Yeah, it's up to the property owner.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the property owner can rely on our police department.
yeah,
I'm
We've
thinking
had
of,
to-
I'm thinking of me.
we've had a
'Cause-
situation where a property owner,
Wanted them,
police went to
yeah,
them.
he
They just
wanted
said,
them
"No, I
there.
don't have any problem. What should they do?"
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Terry Tiffany.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly a step we could, if that became a problem later. Again, it's a question of resources, but we could step up enforcement of that as well by making it illegal to have people, you know,
Right.
camping we probably have ordinances now that say you can't camp in town on private property.
Right.
In many cases, we kind of know people are back in that set of brush. The police know, for example, you know, south of City Park, there's usually people in there.
Yeah,
So-
they're all over town. Some of
Certainly,
them-
one way to take care of it is just as she pointed out, clear the property.
Mhm.
You know, areas, clear it of underbrush,
Mhm.
and once it's visible, they probably don't want to, they
They want to hide.
Yeah, right.
I
I
like,
think the idea of not designating a specific area is what we don't want to designate a
I would
specific
think we're
area,
just gonna
because then
set
I think they'll
ourselves up.
come from Coos Bay and North Bend and wherever
Yeah.
else, and we will create a problem that we can't handle.
I like the proposed approach, but I would. If we're gonna go forward with the schools and the daycare centers, increase, at
Yes.
least for those,
At least 1,000 feet.
childcare facilities, schools. But I like at least the template for the proposed approach.
Yeah.
We can provide you with some maps of what that would look, what the
Right.
1,000
That
feet
would be
would look
great.
like.
Yeah.
About the fires? I don't think there's, I mean, it says you gotta allow them to keep warm. But I'm sorry, even in the summertime, it's kind of cold.
Yeah.
And that is about the wrong time to be lighting up a fire.
Yeah, particularly if they're in the gorse.
Mhm.
I mean, that,
Well, anybody
gorse would
camping
be-
in gorse is crazy.
Well, but I mean, but there's clearings in the
Yeah,
gorse
yeah.
and you definitely don't want somebody in the summer starting. I read something that last year in Portland, half of the fire calls that they got were to homeless camps,
Mm-hmm.
over 1,100 camp calls to homeless camps. And some of them, they did a lot of damage. I'm sure they didn't mean to, they were trying to keep warm. But
Were they fire calls or were they EMS calls? Because they roll fire trucks there for every
well,
EMS
this
call.
said that the fire department was called out because it
Okay.
was an actual fire.
Okay.
They just determined that the half of them were
Okay.
caused by homeless people.
Yeah.
Well, because when you allow, I mean, that's a perfect example of when you allow something to become like Portland and Seattle, well, maybe not Seattle as much, but Portland and San Francisco, the problems that you're creating, the drugs and the mental illness and
They're
You know.
definitely starting fires
Mm.
right here in Bandon, as an example. My gal that works with me up the other store. Building needs a lot of deferred maintenance on the outside. It's got an old cedar siding on it, board and back. She said, Brian, they're starting to tear the siding off the building.
To use for firewood?
uses
Well,
fire.
what else would you use it for? It's
That's
kindling,
true.
because it's cedar and it's light season.
That's true.
And she says it's happening more and more. She says, and of course, all this is happening at night,
Oh, yeah.
but they are burning. And Mary's right. If they're out in the middle of the worst patch and it gets.
Oh.
Could have potential loss of life there. too.
Well, the day of the North Bank fire,
yeah,
there was a fire started in the Willow Mill property.
right.
Just
And that
someone
was
happened to
somebody
see it.
from the museum saw it.
Yeah.
and They were over there halfway up the hill, well, almost behind where the you bought.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they started a fire back there and all of a sudden, and stuff like that in the middle of summer, that
Mhm.
can really,
Yeah, I've got a good note on that. So we can just, no fires on public property outside of city park or an approved fire
yeah. yeah.
place.
See,
place.
if they shut down the forest so that the forester can't, burn the
Yeah.
slash piles, so they should ought to be able to carry that into cities.
Yeah, no, I just think no open fires.
Yeah.
Really doesn't.
Well, I'm just thinking some slap happy lawyer is gonna be looking for somebody's try to sue on it, so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I could see it coming.
Yeah.
Is our hospital equipped to, if we have an influx, are they equipped to take care of, would they just stabilize and transport? Because we have a tiny hospital.
21 beds take care of what?
Well, if we have an influx of homeless people and they get sick or they get injured. Of course, they're probably uninsured. But they have to be treated. Would our hospital be able to handle an influx? I mean, what I'm noticing throughout the state
Can't see that.
is the places that have larger hospitals, there's more homeless camping than in the smaller cities like we have with the rural community hospitals, that kind of thing. So,
Those places also have a lot more services. No other services,
yeah,
food services, wellness services. Shelter services, a little more, much more of
I
a,
think Brookings.
industry.
Brookings is a prime example of what happens when you build it, they will come, is the Episcopal Church in Brookings has a new pastor, Pastor Lindley. And it got so bad, the church is in a residential area. And they were feeding, I think, 5 nights a week and they got so many complaints. Then they started giving COVID shots and all of the services that they could provide, they were trying to provide right there in a residential area. And finally, the city stepped in and they put in a new permit process because other churches were also willing to feed. And so they were decided that each church could feed 2 nights a week. Well, Father Lindley refused to, I'm an Episcopalian, I will say, sorry to say, but anyway, Father Lindley refused to abide by it and they continued to serve as many nights as they wanted in all the services. And now I believe he got the bishop, Father Lindley got the bishop involved. The bishop came to Brookings and now they're getting the governor involved. The governor is Episcopalian and they're thinking that she will help them And I wrote a letter to the editor that appeared in their paper 2 weeks ago that said she'd better stay out of that issue unless she wants to undermine zoning laws across the state. Because they are just completely thumbing their nose at the zoning ordinance that says you're not going to be providing all these services in a residential area. So I hope we don't have a situation like that.
Well, we'll come forward with something on this approach, open fires, ban them.
Yeah.
But I think I got a pretty good sense of where we are. And like I said, there's a whole other set of restrictions that are kind of developing around places, and they all make sense. We will come up with a map on what happens with that 1,000 feet from the schools, childcare centers, that kind of.
Yeah, I'd like to see.
I don't
that.
know what that. Again, you can easily end up in a situation where you've got so many.
Yeah, that you
Places
have
you-
like we did with the marijuana ordinance. and
Yeah.
by the- And by the time you're through, you had a couple of tiny little places,
Yeah,
which is more like what we don't do.
yeah. So we'll take a look, and I would anticipate we probably will have some options. Even at ordinance time, we may have a couple of options, but they'll be a little more refined into specific language we can talk about.
Okay. we'll
Thank you very
move
much.
on. I will say that I have two lengthy folders here with Sprague Theater information. I have it all the way back to at least 7 years ago when major changes were made. So I just thought I'd read through it again this morning, and very interesting.
So just this, I think this is a pretty quick update and one question, one request. So two issues around the Sprague Theater. One is just to bring forward, it's probably, I would say, 120 to 150 or more $1,000 a year to have that theater. When you amortize the cost of new siding every 20 years and your roof every 20 years, other things that, thankfully some folks in the community are helping, pay for, upholstery and carpeting and those sorts of things. But that's just a cost to the community. And it's a tremendous asset. And I don't bring it up for any purpose other than just to be reality based about decisions that we're making. And then you look at how many days a year it gets used. Seems like it could stand to be used more, marketed better, more things. So I've looked into, and thanks to, suggestions from people like Geneva, that we look at potentially doing a strategic plan, a marketing plan for the theater. I think the budget would be 20 to 30,000. It would do a number of things. It would help us kind of decide, help the community and the theater can decide how to go forward. What's the best way to go forward? It would provide I think a pretty good focus for fundraising. You sat and you prioritize the things that the theater needs. What's the city going to be able to provide? What should the community and the users provide? And it may also help with the staffing issue, which is the second issue at the Sprague right now. Of course, we had Jeff who did the Sprague and the barn as a labor of love, I think, in a sense. Above and beyond the call, above and beyond, I think, the compensation that he got. It was a great deal. That deal is not available anymore. We had another guy who was retired, very dedicated, but didn't work well with the users. We may not get that again. We're talking right now to someone who is tentatively at least interested in being running the theater or at least on an interim basis. We'll see how that works. But I think that a strategic plan would also help guide decisions about how you want to staff that, right? Is it somebody who can just, run the sound system and run the lights and sweep up? Is it somebody who's going to market and look for opportunities for things to come to the theater, right? Not market the productions that are happening, but literally be out there kind of running trap lines to figure out who they can get here. So anyway, I just wanted to, before I throw another RFP out on the street, kind of get a head nod from council as to whether or not it would be an urban renewal expense probably. I have to think about that a little bit.
And this is for
Strategic plan for the
strategic
Sprague.
plan.
Yeah.
Because I noticed just yesterday, I noticed 2 more events that were coming in. I think something to do with like the Matt Hanna the photographer, they're doing a big event, it's $75 a person. And it's at the Sprague, June 8th, and then there's another event, June 9th, and then the guy Carver, he's coming. I think there's more and more. If people know, if they have a specific price as to what they can, I think people in the community would be willing, I personally would be willing to rent the theater for a night so that a group could, a music group could present or whatever, and then, make enough money to pay the theater. I think there's ways that we could utilize that, and it seems like more and more. The big thing that we need, and it was pointed out 6 or 7 years ago, is that we need a cadre of person who can do the lights and sounds. That's the key. You don't want just one person that can do that. And I know Geneva's helped with bringing in a guy from Coos Bay who's helping people. But Jeff was kind of, he didn't really want to teach anybody, and that wasn't a good thing.
So for
Who's
the,
currently doing what in that property now? Like with the barn and the Sprague?
So Avery Richards is running the barn.
Right.
Then she's done a great job, I think, of getting more stuff happening there. And she's doing a great job. The Sprague right now is sort of is unstaffed. We have, some volunteers helping out with various things. We're talking about getting an interim theater manager. So right now it's almost user
All hands on deck.
directed, all hands on deck is a good way to put it.
Okay.
We know that's not the situation we want to continue. It's just how that relates to interim staffing, full-time staffing, and a plan. But I think it would be worth, given the amount of money that we sort of invest as a community in that thing every year, spending 20 or 30,000 to help kind of reboot and have a plan seems to be a pretty good use of money. And I just want to get a heads up before we send an RFP out.
30 for the strategic plan.
Yeah.
And I think right now, Maria's program this weekend, I went to opening night and it was definitely sold out, and that brings so many, because she has so many young children in the program and the older kids, it brings in a whole new market of people who don't use the theater as much as they would if they were going to the band and showcase people or the band and playhouse people. It's an all different. And I think people just, they love it. The theater is such, and compared to most communities our size, nobody has a theater like this, as small a town as we are. And it's a huge asset. And I'm sorry, don't smile.
Well, I'm just saying, you said the thing was sold out. Did it make any money? Did any money come in to help pay for everything?
Yeah, I mean, she's paying, yeah.
Okay. So then what do we need to have a theater manager for? If all these people are paying, it should be making money then, shouldn't it? I mean, I see 90 grand for a theater manager, 30 grand for.
Well, I don't
band.
think we're gonna pay 90 grand for a theater manager.
Well, I'm just saying it's in the budget, so.
Well,
I have a question. The people that are, the events that are coming up that Mary just suggested, do we have someone running the lighting and the sound? Because it's my understanding that our equipment is antique, and if it breaks, we're done.
I don't think that's the understanding that I have. No, but no one's running it. I mean, that's the.
So everyone that rents the theater right now is going to run their own lights and their own sound.
There are people that have been trained. Some of them can and some of them can't. Some of them just need a microphone. Some of them need, different people need different things.
Right.
But right now, I mean, the theater is unstaffed. So the only people that can use it are either people that have the capacity themselves or can find someone with the capacity to help them
Okay.
from a volunteer pool or somebody that they know or someone that comes with them.
I think that's what Maria does with her productions, is she has someone that can do most of the lights and
Right.
sound.
yeah,
There
and
are
she,
certain aspects of things that need to be done in there that require some really, shall I say, risky, dangerous even. Like stage rigging, you have to climb a ladder, 20, 30 feet up. I wouldn't even want to do it, let alone. So that's another question is, as long as there's all these people doing this, is there any liability involved on our part?
Well, if it's an employee, then they would be covered by workers' comp.
But if it's the production that's happening now that they're doing all their own stuff.
And the productions have to have
Yeah.
insurance and name us as an additional
They do.
insured. But back to Counselor Powell's point, So the fee that we charge. Okay, the fee that we charge doesn't cover. And the people who put on the events, they retain all the box office. So if they sell out 6 nights, they're gonna pay the same fee whether they sell out 6 nights or not. So,
We still doing concessions?
well, again, we are doing nothing right now because we don't have anyone to do it. Sure.
Staff and I are. As kind of audited. Functioning, and facilitating what. Friends are doing.
Right.
And my office. Reporting things. Such as water heater.
Thank you.
But it's not, as you also pointed out, it's not a long.
Right. There's no one whose job it is.
Because then we've got a popcorn machine. And
Yeah.
They used to sell a lot of pop. And
Yeah, I don't know about the popcorn machine.
They did that at the show Saturday night. They were distributing or selling
And
popcorn,
it-
cookies,
and they came right
soda.
down into the Theater with it. It used to be,
Mhm.
they didn't allow anything. In fact, for a while, they didn't even want water. Now, all these people coming in there with all this popcorn, I went, oh, but then Jeff got the popcorn machine, I guess, right before he left. I don't know.
Oh, it's been.
Well, that's when they were doing movie night.
Well, it was for movie nights, I know, but unfortunately,
Now it's for every event.
now it's for everything. And the smell of, well, you guys have one here too. I mean, I don't know
Yes.
what this fantasy thing with popcorn is, but yeah, in the theater, it got kind of warm and you could smell the popcorn. I mean, it's fine if you're a popcorn lover. But
So is there no current plan right now? Or is there a plan in place and it just needs to be updated?
As far as I know, there's not a plan there may have been one at some point, but there's no plan that's being operated under today.
Under what?
No we're not operating under any strategic plan today. It's not an update. We've got good people kind of lined up that we're going to send it out to though with theater experience, theater planning, community theater, small town community theater planning experience and those kinds of things.
I hope they'll get involved in Band and Playhouse because they really want to, become active again. And that's the thing, the COVID really, it really, waylaid things like the Band and Showcase because they were doing wonderful productions in Band and Playhouse. And it just, for a couple of years, we just didn't have anything. And then people drop out and most of the people that were running the organizations are volunteers. And now it's just hard getting them back and getting them interested again. Things are kind of back to normal and.
I think the key thing is both the plan and the theater management thing is we got people helping out and doing, an amazing job trying to keep the wheels on. But it's really got to be, I think, unless it's somebody's job to help the city and the community create a plan, there's not going to be a plan. And unless it's somebody's job to make sure that theater is being run right, it's not going to be run right. So, and as to the budget, as to how much you pay, I literally don't know. I don't know if it's one person or more people or,
Yeah, I mean, you put a figure in there. It doesn't
and you pay people more if they're working as an independent contractor because they're paying their own taxes and there are no benefits. So that was just a figure.
Yeah. I
Um,
realize that.
So, general nods on the strategic plan. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, we'll get that RFP out. And staffing to be determined. We are working on
right.
at least someone who's interested in potentially at least an interim slot, but again, it's hard to find, I think it's hard to find somebody who is a Jeff, right? Who had their own business, loved the place, would come and clean up afterwards. Whatever the hours were, worked. I don't know that it's going to be easy to find somebody who's going to be.
Well, and the more it's utilized, though, the bigger the role they're gonna have to play, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the more glitches, I think, the more it's used, the more the glitches get ironed out. But at first, it's gonna be somebody's gotta be able to, oh my gosh, this thing's not working. What do I do? And this is somebody who's paid to rent the space. We gotta have somebody at the other end of the
so far we.
other end of the phone.
I think we need to keep an eye on concessions, though. I mean, if you ever if you've ever heard any of these movie theater owners talk, they don't make money on the movies because they're so expensive to rent. They make all their money
Yep.
on concessions, just almost 90% of the money is made in that stupid concession stand.
Well, usually doesn't the concession stand go with the person who's running the theater? It has in the past anyway.
I think it's been both ways.
Well, Chip did decide that he was gonna sell one night.
Yeah,
Well, movie night, I think we kept the concession. 'Cause
Yeah.
It was a city.
yeah.
Yeah,
production.
but more and more people, I noticed the librarian, she's renting it and for a couple of programs with no cost to the public. And the more people you get
Yeah.
involved there, the more, because so many times, I mean, I have hardly missed anything in 22 years over there, however many years it's been. And the band and playhouse would work their hearts out to put on these marvelous productions. And then they play to 60 people.
Mhm.
And the community, and they just, I don't know, to go through the work that they went through and the kind of productions.
You're making
Now,
a point.
well, Maria's got a built, but if you use children, of course, built in.
Yeah, you gotta go, because it's your kid, you gotta go, and all the grandparents gotta go. If we're sitting here sometime talking about selling utilities because they're not paying their full share, why are we putting money into that thing over there?
Because,
I'm sorry,
because
I
the
keep
utilities
myself
are
into that.
totally different. Utilities are enterprise businesses and they have to function as.
Not to
business.
the person that has to pay the monthly.
Well, I know, but you can't shut down. If you shut down everything here, but from the police department to
I'm
the
not saying
fire
police
department that are not paying their way, come on.
I'm just saying, you just said it right there. They put on these great productions, you get maybe 50, 60 people show up. Is it worth putting that much money out for that?
Well,
I
but they're
don't
still
know.
paying, they're paying whether they make money or not, they're still paying the tariff to the theater. They're utilizing the
Their
theater.
tariff needs to be raised a lot.
Well, this is an asset that I would absolutely fight and if, in fact, I wish in your spare time, if you would read all the documentation that I have from the last 10 years about the Sprague Theater, you'll get a better understanding than you will. There's only a few people, and Geneva's one of them, who understands the whole background of as to what's happened and who ran the theater and how it was taken back over. I mean, it's a lot of, but I think the strategic plan, I think I'll fight to the bitter end to save that theater. I mean, I think it's a marvelous asset.
What is the cost to rent the theater for a production, say? Per day.
250 per day.
That's the published rate, that's nothing. The published rate for nonprofits is $250. And then there are additional costs for equipment rental and cleaning.
Yeah.
And, music royalties and things like that. Historically, the theater manager has had, the green light to negotiate with renters, especially if they're renting multiple days, multiple event runs, it makes sense to be able to sort of bundle and package their rental. There is also a considerable precedent for many users getting it for free,
Mhm.
so it's kind of.
Well, like for $500 or $600, let's say $600, let's say a businessman downtown wanted to rent the theater to sponsor, he would basically be sponsoring a program and then you,
Organizing and presenting.
yeah, so you could probably do it for $600.
Just the rental cost, less than probably.
Yeah, or less.
Between 5 and 6, and then,
Okay.
How much was the site?
So
What?
about $600 per day.
Siding gonna cost?
Okay,
$600
but
per day for an event.
Right.
You're actually the day of your.
Yeah.
Live bodies coming in,
Right.
less if you're just doing a rental.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, yeah, Chris, that won't cover the cost of
No,
reciting.
and I know. it-
Anytime soon.
again, if you factor in
Still,
the maintenance of all of these buildings that we have,
I think people get more use out of the police than they do out of the theater, sorry.
and that's a sad commentary,
That's-
a sad commentary for the community.
I think we've come a long way with the building construction standards and materials. probably 90% of the houses in Bandon, I know I just did it, have had to remodel the south side or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
But we've got new materials now that are gonna last a lot longer. They're expensive. Like Dan was saying earlier, everything's so damn expensive, you can't hardly afford it, but at least we know that it can be done, you know, so I don't think we're gonna be looking at a huge
no, we're not.
replacing the siding every 10 years,
No,
you know.
well, this
And-
siding's been on for 22, so.
And as art council, band and the arts council is looking at ways to, you know, raise money to re-carpet. I mean, they're looking at some of the things that need to be done there that. And. So if we don't have any more, I think we'll adjourn, right? Or do you want to set a something for next, you'll figure out what we're gonna do next time.
Well,
Yeah,
I have
Yeah, we're good.
I have on my calendar next Monday at 1:30.
That's the joint.
That's the Joint Planning Commission.
Commission.
Okay,
That's the planning work program development.
okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
I talked to the Egyptian. They had 3 people doing 3 different things.